In our Melbourne studio is the Minister of Resources, Josh Frydenberg. Good evening, Josh.
Nice to be with you, Richo.
Good, mate. Now, I want to start off by saying to you that it seems to me that obviously there's been a great, big, massive, if you like, downturn in mining. How important is it to the Australian economy, and how important will it remain for the Australian economy?
Well, it's absolutely indispensable to the Australian economy. You're right that we have seen a fall in commodity prices. We're actually in the third stage of the boom. The first part of the boom was the prices boom, where Australia enjoyed the highest terms of trade of export to import prices in 140 years, driven out of China by the increased demand for our resources. The second stage of the boom was the investment side, the investment boom, where $400 billion was invested in resource projects, half of which were in LNG between 2003 and 2014. And now we're in the production boom, where a lot of that investment has started to come on stream, and iron ore export volumes are 3 times what they were a decade ago and twice what they were in coal than a decade ago. But for Australia, whenever you see a major downturn in commodity prices, it does hit the budget bottom line. But resources and energy, Richo, still comprises around 10% of the Australian economy, still employs more than 500,000 people, and still makes nearly 60% of our merchandise goods exports. So it still is absolutely critical to the Australian economy.
What about the coal industry in particular? There are a number of factors here. Any move for clean energy, be it continuing to fund wind farms or trying to get new research into what's happening with solar, or even these days people making suggestions about nuclear. Everywhere you go and everywhere you look, it means less coal, and in any event, coal is becoming less and less popular. The Chinese have every reason to try and reduce their reliance on coal. Even if it's got nothing to do with global warming, their pollution is so bad they have to do it. So what's the future for the coal industry? Because that is still, I think, our second biggest mining industry, is it not?
Well, we're the second largest exporter of coal in the world, and you're right, it's the second largest export behind iron ore. Australia gets around 60% of its electricity generation through coal, and the world gets around 40% of its electricity generation through coal. Now, the International Energy Agency says that by 2040, that number will fall from 40% down to 30%. So even in a few decades' time, coal is not going away. Where the emphasis on coal generating power is today is on new high efficiency, low emission power plants, and they're popping up right throughout Asia, and they can reduce the carbon footprint, Richo, by up to 40% on some of those older plants that are currently in operation. Now, Australia's coal is low in sulphur and low in ash, so it's actually very well placed to fuel these new high efficiency, low emission power plants that use coal throughout Asia. But as for renewable energy, we are investing billions of dollars in new renewable energy projects through ARENA and the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. We're supporting 350 scientists through the CSIRO Energy Flagship Program who are investing and discovering new forms of renewable energy projects. And we have the highest take-up of solar panels anywhere in the world per capita, with 1.4 million Australian households with solar panels and 900,000 Australian households with solar hot water systems. So I don't see what we do on the fossil fuel side as being mutually exclusive from what we're doing on the renewable energy side, particularly because now we have this bipartisan agreement to getting 23.5% of our electricity generation by 2020 from renewable sources.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you too, just briefly, about the nuclear option, because I had Sean Edwards, your senatorial colleague from South Australia, on the show last week. Where do you stand on that? Because it's starting to be a bit of a debate again about, well, first off, even the Prime Minister's talking about taking back rods and burying them deep in the heart of Australia somewhere, God knows where, but somewhere. Are you in favour of that, or are you in favour indeed of taking it further and having our own nuclear industry, our own production of nuclear power?
Well, as you know, Jay Weatherall, the Labor Premier in South Australia, has started a Royal Commission into all aspects of the nuclear fuel cycle. And Sean Edwards, who's knowledgeable about this area, has put in a submission saying that Australia should play a greater role. That Royal Commission will report in May, and as a federal government we'll have more to say about that then. But I've been on the record saying Australia has the largest reserves of low-cost reserves of uranium in the world, but we're not one of those 31 countries in the world that use uranium for energy production, whereas the United States, for example, uses more, gets more than 20% of its energy supplies from nuclear power, and in France it's more than 80%. But we have abundant reserves of coal, abundant reserves of gas. So for us, there will be many other cost-related questions that we would need to ask before we would ever move down that path, and I think that's still many, many years away.
Okay, let's have a look at Australia's north. I know you were up in Darwin a few days back discussing that. I mean, where does the north stand? Surely this downturn in mining must have a negative effect on what we're going to do up there.
Yes, certainly parts of northern Australia are feeling the pinch after the downturn in commodity prices. For your viewers, we talk about northern Australia as being above the Tropic of Capricorn in Western Australia and Queensland, and we take in all of the Northern Territory. So it's about 40% of Australia's landmass, but only 5% of Australia's population, and it contributes about 11% to Australia's GDP. But there's a huge endowment of resources up there, Richo. 90% of Australia's gas is in the north. We have 60% of Australia's rainfall falling above the Tropic of Capricorn, but we only actually save 2% of that rainfall. We have 3 high-quality universities. We have wonderful tourist attractions. We have 17 million hectares of arable land. So the missing ingredient in Australia's north is key economic infrastructure, whether that's dams, whether that's road, rail, ports, airports, whether it's communications infrastructure or energy infrastructure. So just a few days ago, Andrew, Rob and I were in Darwin for the first ever Northern Australia Investment Forum, where over 250 people came from 20 other countries around the world to look at investment opportunities in Australia. And I released the eligibility criteria for the $5 billion concessional loan program, which will see the government partner with both the private sector and territory and state governments to try to create that key economic infrastructure. And I believe that once that infrastructure is in place, and given the international interest in our north, we will see a huge amount of job creation, wealth creation and further development in Australia's north.
It's been promised so many times, I don't know how many ministers I've heard say it over the course of the last 40 or 50 years. I only hope, Josh, you're the one who delivers. Look, I'm sorry I've got to leave it there. I could go on a lot longer, but thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Josh. We'll talk to you again soon. Josh Frydenberg in Canberra.